Malachi Williams, a boy of only 13 years old, stood before the court, accused of breaking into a residence. He appeared nervous, but his eyes showed an unusual determination. When he looked directly at the judge, no one could have imagined what was about to happen. With the courtroom in silence, he declared in a clear voice, "You are my mother." The statement caused an immediate impact. The courtroom fell completely silent, and even the people who had been whispering among themselves stopped. All eyes turned to the judge, who seemed paralyzed. Her rigid posture gave way to an expression of pure astonishment. No one knew what to think, but something in that phrase seemed to carry more than just words. What Malachi said seemed to be the beginning of something much bigger, something that would start to unearth secrets that no one could have foreseen. Malachi was seated on the defendant's bench, his head down, his shoulders slumped. He wore a shirt so faded that it seemed to have lost all its color, while his worn-out sneakers, full of holes, betrayed a life marked by poverty and neglect. Next to him, the court-appointed lawyer tried to appear calm, but the slight tremor in his hands and the worried gleam in his eyes betrayed his nervousness. Judge Margot Vaughn, known for her strictness and unwavering sense of justice, adjusted her glasses with a mechanical gesture before striking the gavel. The sound echoed through the room, capturing everyone's attention. At 53 years old, Margot had built a solid reputation as a magistrate who followed the rules to the letter, regardless of the circumstances. However, that day, something seemed different. The defense lawyer stood up and broke the silence. "Your Honor, my client is only 13 years old. He is accused of property invasion, but he did not cause any damage, nor did he steal anything. He was just looking for a place to sleep." Margot looked at the lawyer over her glasses and responded firmly, "Master Renner, the law exists to protect everyone, including the owners whose homes are invaded. We cannot minimize the gravity of the situation just because he is young." As the conversation unfolded, Malachi nervously fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, avoiding the judge's gaze. Then Margot addressed the boy directly, her voice laden with authority. "Malachi, do you understand why you are here? Do you know what it means to break into someone's house without permission?" He slowly raised his head, and with difficulty replied in a whisper, "I just wanted a place to stay. I wasn't going to take anything. I just wanted to feel safe." A murmur spread through the room, but Margot raised her hand, demanding silence. Her tone remained firm as she said, "Feeling safe is not an excuse to break into someone else's property. There are shelters and institutions that can help you." Before she could continue, Malachi interrupted her, his voice trembling yet determined. "Those places are never there for me. Never." He took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure, but the words began to flow, charged with emotion. "No one helps me because no one wants me." The lawyer tried to calm him, but Malachi didn't stop. A mixture of anger and despair shone in his eyes as he looked directly at the judge. "But you are here. You are my mother." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Every gaze turned to the boy and to the judge, who appeared completely disconcerted. She furrowed her brow and asked hesitantly, "What did you say?" "You are my mother," Malachi repeated, now in a lower voice but filled with conviction. He took a deep breath and repeated, this time with more force, "You are my mother." The murmurs filled the courtroom again, and the tension in the air was palpable. Judge Margot blinked several times, as if trying to process what she had just heard. The gavel she held slipped from her hands and fell onto the table with a dry sound. Her expression alternated between incredulity and confusion. "This is absurd," she whispered, almost unconsciously. But Malachi stepped forward and said, his voice choked with emotion, "I know it's you. I know because I saw your picture." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "My adoptive mother, Lucille, showed me. She told me everything before she died." Margot's eyes widened, and her name echoed like a reminder that brought back long-buried memories. The judge's face turned pale, and her lips moved as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. "Malachi, perhaps it would be better if—" began the lawyer, but the boy interrupted, gently pushing his hand aside. His eyes shone with tears, and his voice emerged trembling, laden with emotion. "Why did you leave me? I waited so long to find you, and now you say nothing. Are you just going to keep pretending that you don't know me?" Judge Margot felt a knot form in her stomach. Her mind was in chaos, filled with conflicting thoughts. This boy is mistaken. It can't be true. Not here. Not now, she kept repeating to herself. But the weight of everyone's gaze in the room was inescapable. With effort, she stood up, trying to keep her voice steady. "I will request a recess of the hearing." She hurriedly left through the side door, leaving the courtroom in an uproar. Behind those doors, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath, but the memories she had long avoided began to resurface like an avalanche. Margot remembered the night when Hugo, her then husband, insisted that they give the baby up for adoption. He had said, "You have a career to build, Margot. We're not ready to raise a child. He will have a better life with another family." She recalled the silent tears she had shed that night, the baby sleeping in her arms for the last time. She remembered the tremor in her hands as she signed the papers that would seal Malachi's fate. Outside in the courtroom, Malachi was still seated. His face was red with anger and sadness, his eyes fixed on the ground as he tightly pressed his knees together. "She won't say anything," he whispered, his voice laden with bitterness. "She always runs away." Suddenly, the courtroom door opened forcefully, and the sound of a woman's heels echoed through the room. It was Lorene Parker, a social worker with a determined expression. Her arrival caught everyone's attention. "Malachi," she began, her voice firm, yet with a touch of softness. The boy lifted his head and recognized her immediately. She continued, "I came as soon as I found out. I think it's time for the truth." The defense lawyer looked at her, confused. "Who are you?" "I am Lorene Parker. I supervised Malachi's adoption process when he was a baby." "I can clarify a few things," she replied with determination. Malachi's eyes, now filled with both hope and pain, fixed on her. He slowly stood up. "You knew all along? You knew who she was?" Lorene sighed, diverting her gaze toward the door through which Margot had exited. "Yes, I knew, but it wasn't my responsibility to reveal that. Margot did what she thought was best at the time, but it wasn't fair to you." "Then why didn't anyone tell me?" Malachi's voice broke. "Why did I only find out when it was too late? My adoptive mother died and left me alone, and now she's here and doesn't even want to look at me." Lorene gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I know it's hard, but you deserve answers, and Margot needs to face them." On the other side of the door, Margot listened to every word. She felt paralyzed, the painful memories of Hugo and the baby she had left behind surfacing. Taking a deep breath, she knew she could no longer run away. When she finally opened the door and returned to the courtroom, all eyes turned to her. Margot took a deep breath, trying to keep her composure. "Malachi," she said with a wavering voice, "we need to talk." In a more private place, the boy hesitated, his eyes fixed on her, as if weighing whether it was worth following her. Lorene whispered, "Go on, Malachi. You deserve to hear what she has to say." After a moment, he nodded and followed Margot down a narrow corridor to a small, secluded room. There Margot sat down, her trembling hands crossed over her knees. "You want answers, Malachi, and you have every right to. But I don't know. I don't know where to start," she confessed. "Why did you abandon me?" he blurted out, the pain evident in his voice. "Why was I not good enough?" "You were never the problem, Malachi," she answered, her eyes brimming with tears. "The problem was me. At that moment in my life, I didn't think I was capable of being your mother." "That doesn't make any sense," Malachi exclaimed, crossing his arms as if to shield himself. "Why didn't you try? I was just a baby." Margot swallowed hard, struggling to explain. "I was young. I was just starting my career. Hugo, my husband at the time, convinced me that the best for you was to be raised by another family. He said we had nothing to offer you, and that you deserved more. You chose your career. You chose him. But you didn't choose me," Malachi retorted, his voice filled with hurt. Lorene intervened calmly. "Margot, he's right. You need to be honest. He deserves the truth." Margot nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I signed those papers because I was scared of disappointing you. I told myself I was giving you a chance at a better life, but the truth is, I was running away, running from myself." "And now?" Malachi asked, taking a deep breath, his voice heavy with pain. "Now you're here, and I just want to know. Why? Why did you never come back for me?" Margot, momentarily speechless, finally replied, "I thought it was too late. I hid behind work, but I never stopped thinking about you. And now all I can do is ask you to let me try to fix what was broken." Margot placed her hand on her forehead, trying to soothe the pain caused by Malachi's words. "I'm sorry," she whispered almost inaudibly. "I'm sorry for everything. For not being there, for not being enough." Loreen stepped forward, dividing her gaze between Malachi and Margot. Her voice was firm, yet empathetic. "Margot, you cannot change the past, but Malachi is here now. He needs more than apologies." Then she turned to the boy. "Malachi, none of this erases what you've been through, but perhaps it can be the beginning of something new." Malachi shifted his gaze between Loreen and Margot. He seemed torn, carrying the desire to believe, but fearing being hurt again. "Do you want to try?" he asked, his voice low yet full of meaning. "Do you want to be my mother now?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Margot looked at him, and for the first time she saw not just the boy she had lost, but an opportunity to rebuild something she had thought impossible. "Yes, Malachi," she replied, her voice choked. "I want to try." From that moment on, they began, cautiously, to explore a relationship they had never had. Loreen facilitated the first steps, organizing small meetings where they could get to know each other without pressure. At the first meeting, Margot visited the community center where Malachi spent his time. The place was simple, with walls painted in vibrant colors and a basketball court at the back. She watched him play with other boys, laughing and seeming more relaxed than in court. For a few minutes she stood at the entrance, not wanting to interrupt. When he noticed her, he stopped hesitantly, with an uncertain expression. She simply smiled and nodded slightly. Malachi rolled his eyes, but a small smile escaped before he returned to the game. After the game, he approached her, sweaty and visibly uncomfortable. "You didn't have to come," he said in a defensive tone. "I know," Margot replied calmly, "but I wanted to see where you spend your time." Malachi shrugged, drinking water from his bottle. "There's not much to see. That's it." "It seems important to you," she responded sincerely. "And if it's important to you, it's important to me as well." He didn't reply, but something in his eyes showed that her words had touched something within him. Over time, their meetings became more frequent. Margot tried to give Malachi space, while also demonstrating a constant presence. During a dinner, he unexpectedly opened his heart. "I thought about you yesterday," he said suddenly while eating a hamburger. Surprised, Margot looked at him, maintaining her calm. "Oh, really? Why?" "Because a new boy arrived at the place where I was staying before. He seemed lost just as I felt, and I thought, if you had arrived earlier, maybe I wouldn't have felt that way." The lump in Margot's throat returned forcefully. She took a deep breath before answering. "I can't change the past, Malachi, but if that boy needs help, perhaps we can help him together." He didn't respond, but nodded slightly, as if accepting the idea. As the months passed, the bond between them began to strengthen. One day, Malachi casually mentioned that he liked to draw. Without saying anything, Margot bought him a notebook and pencils. When she handed him the gift, he held it carefully, his eyes showing a mixture of surprise and distrust. "You didn't have to," he said quietly. "I know," she replied with a smile, "but I wanted to." Later, upon discovering one of his drawings, she was surprised by the richness of details in a simple landscape. "You have talent," she praised. "It's nothing special," he murmured, looking away. "I think it's amazing," Margot insisted. Over time, small gestures of trust began to emerge. Malachi started saying things like, "I liked it when you came today," or "Maybe we can do this again." The decisive moment came when Margot decided to formalize the bond between them. She filed for custody, and the process was long, with many trips to court. But finally, the day of the final hearing arrived. Malachi sat beside her, quieter than usual. When the judge announced that custody had been granted, Margot felt immense relief. She turned to Malachi, who tried to hide a smile. "And now?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with hope and fear. "Do you think it will work?" "I don't know," Margot replied honestly, "but I think we can try together." When they left the courtroom, she extended her hand to him. Malachi hesitated, but after a moment he took her hand. As they walked side by side under the bright sun, he whispered, "I never had anyone. Maybe now I have found someone." Margot squeezed his hand more firmly without saying a word. It was just the beginning, but a real beginning. "And you? Do you believe that love and forgiveness can transform lives? Leave your opinion in the comments and share this story with those who need it. After all, it's never too late to start over.